Have you been looking for a Taekwondo podcast with qualified people who know what they're talking about, who help you keep up with everything going on in the Taekwondo world? Well, you found it. This is the Taekwondo Podcast. Taekwondo news, competitions and other events, training and sports science, keeping the fans, coaches, and high-performance athletes up to date with the latest news and trends on Olympic Taekwondo. Let's do this. This is the Taekwondo Podcast. And now your hosts, Coach César Valentim and Peter Nessler.
Hello and welcome to the Taekwondo Podcast. We are a podcast based out of Austria in English language for everyone out there who likes Taekwondo. In this episode, I will talk to you about strength conditioning training for specific Taekwondo athletes. We will discuss the importance of the power training and the physiology of modern Taekwondo. Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Coach César Valentim, and today I'm here alone talking with you about strength and conditioning training for Taekwondo. I'm discussing some of the key aspects that people have been asking on the comment sections on the Instagram and our Facebook pages. So this is a monologue. It's not something that we're used to at this podcast, but considering all the events recently and what we are planning to do on the next episode after the Grand Prix, I thought that it was important to talk about Taekwondo Kyorugi, the Olympic discipline also known as Sport Taekwondo. Well, as a combat sport, we are characterized by being a fast and a powerful leg techniques in short and intermittent cycles. It's basically an opposition game played between two athletes who for 3 or before even 4 rounds of 2 minutes would score powerful kicks on the electronic body and head protectors of the opponent while protecting their own equipment. Despite the rounds being of 2 minutes, the ratio of work and rest period is unique to every athlete. And even the high weight divisions or at different bouts will have different times and different player profiles. Even the same athlete will have different work and rest ratios depending on the competition on their opponent. Since most of the sessions in terms of training, strength and conditioning are group sessions, the average values of these work and rest ratios have to be identified, allowing the group training to be inside of the thresholds that suits the general athlete and match type. These values are constantly evaluated with the same markers through video analysis. Since small changes in the competition rules will have some change in the recent past, changing the dynamic of the sport. Basically, in terms of physiology, sports taekwondo is essentially a very high-intensity sport with very short periods of work and short periods of active rest. While the evolution of modern equipment and competition rules, the players spend around 2-minute rounds in high-intensity levels with an average heart rate around 95% of their maximum heart rate frequency, reaching between 10 and to 13 millimoles per kilo of lactate concentrations in their system at the end of the third round when they get to the third round. Of course, there's different analysis. You can see that the 49 players females will be very different from the 68 or from the minus 80 males. And you can see that the heart rates during warm-up and the matches are not the same as in the real event, in the real competitions. And if you have the chance of use a heart rate monitor, if you talk to the event organizer and they let you use one, you will be able to analyze the matches. And of course, you will be able to measure the lactate in the end of each round. And after the match, 15, 30 minutes to see also the lactate deconstruction on the body. Funny enough, the last weekend at the Austrian Open, the national team had some athletes being picked up for those kind of tests done by the Sports Institute of Austria. And many studies out there show different levels of athletes, the lactate thresholds to measure basically their energy thresholds. In terms of power training, that lactate for me is not so important because sports taekwondo in terms of power has 2 big technical needs. At first, the athletes must kick the opponent with high enough force to activate the electronic system, most of those times in a very high range of motion, and they have to have very high speed techniques and precision. The second set of the important skills is the clinching, where the athletes need to push each other trying to gain the distance or control the position inside the competition area, and this is a very high demand of strength to prevent being pushed by the opponent. Nowadays, with the new rules, the rules that started, in June, the competition will have longer active kicking moments and a little shorter clinch techniques because you're not allowed to stay so long in a clinch without kicking. That means that the demand of strength to prevent being pushed by the opponent is important, but the power on the incoming into the clinch needs to be way more explosive. Training in sports, Taekwondo needs to consider that a powerful leg training needs to be complemented with isometric and explosive strength training also for the upper body. One can only consider the rotational and anti-rotational training to prepare the players to withstand all those forces produced by him or herself in their opponents. Identifying those force baselines of the athlete and rates of force development are important steps in the training process. In my training facilities in Vienna, with the help of the force plates from Hawk and Dynamics, wireless accelerometers from output or from push, we were able to identify several parameters. For us, the most common parameters to be analyzed are, of course, force velocity profiling, reactive strength index, and rate of force development. And on the first cycles of the strength training for the athletes transitioning into the competition team or transferring from other Austrian clubs that have no tradition in strength and conditioning, the athletes go through an introductory phase that can last up to 2 years. In this phase of strength and conditioning, the players work on building muscle, components of hypertrophy training and maximum strength training, that usually, of course, the general reactive strength training. So depends, of course, in each club and which athletes levels you're talking, but when you're talking a high performance level, and if the athletes come from a base group in your club or they come from other clubs or from other countries, other regions, you have to consider that training background. We've talked about this several times in other podcasts with other strength and conditioning coach and other Taekwondo coaches. And that's in this phase that most of the exercises are bilateral with moderate loads. Some exercises, they include even transfer to the sport-specific techniques, but with very, very small volume and intensity. While the experienced athletes that have a solid base and knowledge of strength training will have primarily unilateral strength exercises, big transfer effect to the sport, higher loads. These athletes also have a busier competition schedule. Most of the players, they have to gather all these points to qualify for the Grand Prix or to have national qualifications to qualify for the national team so that they can later go to continental and world championships. And of course, with this busier competition schedule with higher demands and of other training solutions, mostly due to weight restrictions, nutritional aspects, and time restrictions, will remove many of the training possibilities in the competition season. Older athletes tend to have more availability due to the flexibility of combining university or work schedules than the juniors and cadets. Myself, I don't consider cadets high performance, therefore I will not include very high loads of strength and conditioning outside of the normal technical Taekwondo training that they will do once a day. But the younger athletes usually are limited by the amount of time they have outside of their school, the schedules that they have with their family. All those things need to be taken in consideration, and that makes the strength and conditioning part of a Taekwondo training very, very interesting to measure the different ages, developmental strength and conditioning phases, developmental ages, their work schedules, school schedules. So makes the complexity of a Taekwondo trainer, Taekwondo training and our work a little more interesting. In my system, I tend to divide the cadets from the others. I think most centers do that, and some centers don't even have the higher level athletes, or they just don't work with the beginner athletes. They will have one or the other group. It happens a lot in North America. In Europe, it's the tradition that most of the clubs or centers begin with the base level all the way to the high competition level. In some countries, of course, the national federations will absorb the high performance athletes into their own program, removing them from the clubs. It's a solution that works for clubs or centers that don't have the financial availability to either implement a full-time program or to invest on competitions and all the costs associated with also the travel and competition of Taekwondo, but also the associated with the equipment and venues necessary for the strength and conditioning training. So those materials and those methods are a key part of the strength and conditioning training, especially on the power part of Taekwondo. The transition into sport-specific strength training follows the didactic principles of sports training, with a general and technical less demanding component, a big focus on intramuscular coordination, on muscle fiber recruitment for building strength in the first cycles, building strength, and then transferring it to Taekwondo-specific power. That is done over a period of 2 to 3 years, with each cycle lasting between 8 months to a year. So my preferred method on the first cycle, when I talk with the beginners that have no background on SNC or their young age, is the simple ATR, periodization systems, where you get accumulation phase, a transition phase, a realization phase, with a big emphasis on muscle growth, increasing the maximum strength and endurance capacity. The second and third cycles, of course, are focused on the development of powerful sport-specific motor skills. The focus is on speed and explosive strength, a big component of unilateral reactive strength movement patterns and unilateral weightlifting derivatives. While later in my third cycle, there is an implementation of VBT training. Velocity-based training is a very powerful method, seeking to work on the optimal speeds and loads with the optimal rate of force development. Of course, for that, you need to know the exercise, you need to know the athlete, and you need to test them. Usually there's, in VBT training, there is no guessing. You have to assess, you have to have the devices, and these days there are really affordable devices for you to use it. Of course, if you can, getting your force plates will add immense value. Once again, shout out to our sponsor, Hawken Dynamics. They have the best ones out there for us, and it's wireless and helps us a lot to do this. And maybe I can go through some of the exercises we do on the first cycles in case you want to hear them. Like on the first cycle of the general strength exercises, bilateral and unilateral, we do weightlifting derivatives, especially on bilateral strength exercises, some general plyometrics, general agility drills, simple Taekwondo displacement, simple Taekwondo techniques, time-oriented Taekwondo drills, scoring-oriented Taekwondo drills that have allowed to combine the strength training with the technical part of Taekwondo so that you are basically allowing a good transfer and also muscle build. And the second aspect of the first cycle would be the hypertrophic muscular development. Basically, I focus on isotonic exercises, usually traditional machines you find in the gym, transitioning to functional movement patterns with bigger loads. In this cycle, we focus on rotation, extension, anti-rotation, anti-extension, and sensomotoric exercises, basically the plyometrics. And having all those machines allow me to work on a linear movement, not allowing the player to escape from a clean and correct muscle workout. If you go into functional with higher loads, and you don't, the player doesn't dominate, doesn't control the technique, it's not so productive. Especially on muscle building, it's easier to go with the machines training exercise, normal gym exercises, for them to build those squats, those bench presses, and build the loads and build the muscle recruitment, and also the synchronization of the muscle fibers, allowing them to increase the technique with less injury risk. On the second cycle, when you go to the specific strength exercises, I transfer already to the sports techniques. Introduction of Taekwondo techniques into the strength program with the transfer exercises in connection with the strength exercises. We start with unilateral, mainly one leg strength exercise because Taekwondo is standing on one leg, kicking with the other, followed by Taekwondo movement patterns either in the exercise build or just adjacent to the exercise. So you do a strength exercise together with a Taekwondo movement, allowing the transfer of the strength training into the technical training. Of course, the introduction of resisted or assisted Taekwondo exercises, the development of strength in the sport-specific movement pattern, either by creating opposition to your kicks or to your punches. We all do this, working with rubber bands, working with weights, working with your partner. It's one of the best ways of introducing assisted or resisted Taekwondo exercises for strength in the sport-specific techniques. Well, my third cycle, that's when I go into the VBT training. I'll get to velocity-based training, power, all these Instagram videos that everybody likes to see of the players using those mines, barbells, and landmines, and the jumpings, and all these things on unilateral changing of direction. So basically, I go to maximum strength exercises in connection with Taekwondo specific movement patterns, and they are used much more frequently than before, promoting bigger muscle fiber recruitment and synchronization, and also bigger transfer to the sport specific technique that is done in almost every exercise. Then that's the secret, the transfer of the exercise. Exercise have to be, when you do strength training, it's very hard to create a transfer to Taekwondo, something that doing a big and heavy squat does not necessarily transfer you to a powerful kick unless you strength and conditioning training is associated with the Taekwondo training. The trend these days is actually to have strength and conditioning and Taekwondo integrated, not to have someone else do your strength and conditioning training that is not sport specific and then later on a Taekwondo session. It's good as I said, in the first cycles in the beginner athletes. When we go to the higher development athletes, you should actually consider doing both in an integrated approach. And the second part of the third cycle will be the strength exercises that are connected to conducted on the optimal optimal velocity thresholds, minimizing the fatigue and looking to increase the force velocity profile from the athletes into both the strength and speed axis. So when you have force plates, so you don't even need force plates, you can have these camera apps that will allow you to identify speed and together with different thresholds on the weight you put on them. Back squats, for example, we are allowed to create a force velocity profile. And that's something that is very easy to do. The other part is to identify the rates of effort rest for individual athletes. And that with Athlete Analyzer, analyzing the videos from the matches or even test matches, you can identify that each athlete has their own fighting style. And with some weight divisions having more dynamic matches and active periods than other, lighter weight divisions tend to have a higher movement load than heavier players. Athlete Analyzer with the video tool allows you to actually measure exactly the active and rest and what kind of techniques and which kind of round, which kind of match. Of course, the size of the field of play is the same for every weight division. Therefore, the distance and durations of the active periods are also relatively different with heavier athletes because they're being bigger, interacting more with the opponents in technical exchange than in technical displacements will allow them to have different kind of action. And to put it mildly, they have less space and time to move closer or away from the opponent, resulting in more time in their clinch positions. When you plan the group sessions, you have to take this into consideration. So Taekwondo teams, especially during the recent pandemic restrictions, have to work with smaller groups at the same time, adding the difficulty of training with other athletes or on the technical and tactical sessions. The fact that you have different age divisions, different weight catches, and they need to work with each other, you have to find the common denominators on the effort rest time. So that's important to identify all the athletes, create 1-2 groups or even a pattern if you're lucky enough that works for all of them. And with the video analysis, in my club, I came to the conclusion that most of my team, the team 1, has like an active effort rest periods of 6 seconds for active kicking, 6 seconds for clinching, and 6 seconds for active displacements without techniques. That allows me to build a complex high intensity interval training. So instead of just having a Tabata or whatever, high intensity and pause or work pause interval training, my HIIT trainings are mimicking the video analysis. So I can have a very high intensity interval. Then I have a lower intensity interval that would be the clinch, and then I would have an active rest interval. So instead of having a HIIT training that has active or high and low, I will actually have a very high and low training, and it will allow me allow the player to have the training that will basically compensate and mimic their competition style.
This podcast is supported by Hawken Dynamics. Hawken Dynamics believes that technology is most useful when it stays out of your way. That's why Hawken developed the world's first wireless force plate system with extreme usability. It is the quickest, easiest to use, and most robust solution on the market. It is trusted by all sports organizations, large and small, as well as tactical, military, and rehabilitation environments around the globe. It's force testing in the palm of your hand. Here at Vienna Taekwondo Center, we use Hawken Dynamics to test and monitor our team. The cloud-based platform allows us to access data and publish a variety of reports on the go. My favorites are trend reports and, of course, weight reports, where I can monitor different metrics to view progress and identify performance indicators, or to compare weights to a baseline data range. I use it on a daily basis to identify readiness. A simple jumping test takes me less than a minute to assess the entire team. Having my own Hawken Dynamics force plates allows me to test reactive strengths, maximum strengths, rate of force development, asymmetry, and so much more. The real-time feedback on the app is useful not only for testing, but as a training tool, making it more accurate and at the same time more engaging for the athletes. If you are interested in learning more about Hawken Dynamics or getting your own, the team can be reached at info@hawkendynamics.com or on Instagram or Twitter @HawkenDynamics.
This podcast is sponsored by First Beat Sports. First Beat Sports combines the most comprehensive analytics in team sports with a customizable interface to support real-time monitoring, recovery monitoring, performance management, and much more. The result? Data-driven decisions that support your athletes and team training, recovery, and performance goals. First Beat Sports is trusted by professionals. Over 23,000 athletes representing over 1,000 teams around the world rely on the solution to train and plan with confidence on a team and individual level using HRV-based insights. For more information, please visit our website, firstbeat.com/sports.
When talking about Taekwondo training, we need to talk about Athlete Analyzer. Athlete Analyzer is the first Taekwondo-specific athlete monitoring system. It is used by both national teams, regional squads and small clubs to maximize performance, prevent injuries and communicate with both athletes and trainer teams. Athlete Analyzer is a cloud-based system with a friendly smartphone app. You can plan and monitor every aspect of your training, even when you are not in the gym with your team. The easy-to-use video analysis tool is not like anything you've seen. It helps you understand your athletes and even their opponents, making this app the only tool you need to manage your team. Before I used Athlete Analyzer, I spent an absurd amount of time in front of the computer, creating spreadsheets and using half a dozen software solutions. I have athletes in my center, but also abroad, and with Athlete Analyzer, it's much easier to communicate, plan, and monitor their development. Now that I have extra time, I can focus on what matters, training my athletes, and it still leaves me some room to do other stuff, like this Taekwondo podcast. Athlete Analyzer offers you a 2 weeks free trial. Visit them at athleteanalyzer.com to sign up, or click on the link in the episode's description. To get the most of your free trial, I recommend you first book a free personal demonstration with Nicholas. It will give you a great insight of what Athlete Analyzer has to offer you and your team. It is well worth the time.
You're listening to the Taekwondo Podcast. Now back to your hosts, Coach César Valentim and Peter Nessler.
Welcome back. So, when identifying the optimal force velocity profile of the athletes, the force places or optical devices like smartphone cameras can be very, very useful in strength testing. We use Hawken dynamic plates and software to identify several parameters, allowing us to create these horizontal and vertical force velocity curves for our players for both monitoring and planning of strength training. We use the push device, a wireless accelerometer that we can use for monitoring and identify optimal speed and power values that guide our training program. We moved then since then to output sports. It is a little more dynamic, allows you also to enter into the rehabilitation training. And if you already do the planning and the training periodization somewhere else, you don't really need the push platform or the cloud platform. The device is still very good. I still use it for barbell velocity. I just don't use it for all kind of VBT trainings that I use in the club, because you can attach it to the ankles, you can attach it to your feet. Actually, I always have one of those output devices in my backpack when I travel to competition, even to monitor just fatigue, because a simple counter movement jump will measure if your athlete is actually tired or not. And that's something that you can always travel. It's so small, smaller than a Bluetooth headset, and you can carry it with you all the time, and the battery lasts a long time. So, and the other part, it's also to identify the rate of force development. Some studies say that rate of force development has direct correlations to the maximum speed development of the players. And using tests like an isometric mid-tide pull test on the force plates, we can identify honest peak outputs and RFD in different moments of the exertion timeline. Coaching cues and regularly conducting these tests allows me to monitor strength development in an easier and faster way than just a simple one repetition max testing. And as you guys know, I'm a very data-driven guy. I collect as much data as I can, as long as I'm not getting too much data to sync on it. And the data that I find that is actually more important, and that was the first equipment I started using a long time ago, of course, besides 1RMs at the time, was the heart rate in training, and later on heart rate variability using the sensors, especially the first beat sensors that do have very accurate data. Allows you to interpret the training and the level of training, and also the recovery from the players. It allows you to also to monitor stress and fatigue. It's one of those things that allows you to plan and monitor your players to avoid burnout later on in the game. And when it comes to strength training, interpreting the results from the strength testing and all the data needs a long timeline, since the first perceptible changes need to be discarded due to the fact that the technical acquisition of the movement is the first reason for the increase of almost every value in the metrics we analyze. The players are not getting stronger after 4 weeks of training. After 4 weeks, the data can be interpreted with cleaner values, because the first data was the player learning how to do the movement, therefore being able to recruit the muscles correctly to make a stronger bench press, a stronger back squat, a stronger front squat. So after those 4 weeks, you have a cleaner data, allowing us to start monitoring and programming accordingly. And it can be seen if you use eccentric utilization rate reports from the force plates. again, data is a lot of important stuff, but knowing your athletes, planning the training for them, not getting a copy-paste plan from everyone else is what's going to make you get better in the game. And if you have any questions, if you want to see some of my data, if you want to see some of the testings I do, if you want to have interpretation of data, or if you want to actually know how to use some of the software I use, reach out. You can reach me at taekwondopodcast@gmail.com, on the @taekwondopodcast on Instagram, and @taekwondocast on Facebook. So thank you for listening. I know I speak a lot. I know it was almost like a lecture, very fast in very complicated terminology, but it was important to answer some of the questions you guys had. And it was a pleasure being here with you and with everyone who's listening out there. This was a Taekwondo podcast. If you haven't already, listen to our other episodes that are available wherever you listen to your podcasts. We are releasing new episodes every Tuesday. Stay tuned, subscribe to the podcast, leave us a positive review, and share it with your friends. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Taekwondo podcast, keeping the fans, coaches, and high-performance athletes up to date with the latest news and trends on Olympic Taekwondo. Your host, Coach César Valentim, has almost 20 years of experience with high-performance Taekwondo and has worked all around the world as a Taekwondo trainer. Peter Nessler has been teaching Taekwondo for more than 20 years, and he's currently one of the top referees in Europe. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram at Taekwondo Podcast, on Facebook at Taekwondo Cast, and the website taekwondopodcast.com. See you next time.